Ms. Frandel Gerard, will be speaking on emancipation, what transpired in the town of Frederiksted. We have a short film of a walking tour of historical places in Frederiksted. So,
Alana Brown, and it's my honor.
So we're a little we're improvising. That's the word. That's the word. So the video that was going to be shown, you can see it on YouTube. It's on the VI Department of Education's
YouTube page.
YouTube page, and it was a project that Shalana did for the 175th celebration of emancipation. I think we probably got about 3 hours of raw video.
Yeah, we have lots of raw footage that we could even snip up into like little details, but mostly I'm so appreciative for you to participate in that, because you beautifully spoke in about what the incidences and factual information and social commentary on the occurrences and its ramifications later on and our current identity. But along with oral history, we had persons that used to tell stories under the tamarind tree, but we have to recognize that we need our oral traditions to now go into the digital age. And I'm just so appreciative for you for taking the call so we could bring oral traditions into our school system.
Well, I was honored to be able to do it. And I did hear myself make 2 mistakes, so we're gonna have to re-edit. But it's been impactful in that it's available to all of the teachers, it's available to all of the students, and I really think that Shalana deserves a lot of credit for reaching into communities, speaking with people, recording, doing short videos, and doing projects that are adaptable in the classroom. Since BI history, Caribbean history, is not yet incorporated in the curriculum as it should be. And I'd like to take this minute to honor and say thank you to Mary Moorhead and Mario Moorhead and all of those who fought the battle that they won to make sure that the children in our schools are taught Virgin Islands and Caribbean history. So thank you, Eldris Moorhead and Mario and all others. And one of the things that we talk about, the disparity in, we both had the opportunity to participate in a $1 million multi-year grant that some scholars from Denmark were involved in, where they couldn't/wouldn't pay Virgin Islanders, and where research and interpretation is still happening outside. And with young people like Shalana and others, it's spurring research within our community. And emancipation is big, but Neville Hall in his book, the chapter where he deals with emancipation, is called The Victor Vanquished. The Victor Vanquished. Because it was not a complete revolution. Because within months, the system made sure that the now free people were conscripted back to the plantation. And what we do know is that many left. They left the island. They came into towns to establish their residences. We're doing a project in Freegut in Frederiksted. And 1850, which we think is, it's looking like it might have been a year that the recorder of deeds actually filled in final documentation. Numerous properties on one block in Hospital Street are subdivided. Some are subdivided into 4 pieces, some are subdivided into 3 pieces, where now free blacks are occupying well, it was always free blacks, but occupying those properties. So Freegut in Frederiksted, post-emancipation, expanded. They actually added 2 streets to Frederiksted post-emancipation to accommodate all of the former plantation workers who were moving into town. But let's remember that part of that labor law was also the vagrants law. So anybody could stop a black man or woman on the street, ask them where they're working, why they're not working, and could instantly arrest them. Yep.
Children were meant to work very young as well, and there were ordinances in that, yeah.
And so they would be sent back to the plantation with no remuneration, because now they're wards of the court. So there's a lot of research and a lot of stories. So we had a long day that day.
Yeah, we had a long day, and it's important that we continue to progress those conversations and to do research. That's why we hope to, through the Division of Cultural Education, to work to get students to be interested in anthropology, archaeology, because it's everybody comes from a bias from their experiences in life. And so while I don't doubt that persons come with vigor to want to study spaces that maybe they haven't grown up in, we have the context to look for the information that recontextualizes our identity at this time, and to like fill in the blanks, because as again, we've been doing oral history for so long, and then there's all these questions, and we need to, I think at this point still we're not quite sure. We were just having a conversation about the death of Bud Ho, and so new research has come about. Even if it's questionable, it's still good that we are having these conversations, because even today, we still don't have solid information about occurrences that have happened in our history. And so I thought that the department lent good support to the division in allowing me to do the video, so we can bring those questions and incite young people to have more thought about what emancipation has done and made available for them, or are we truly living in an emancipated state? So, yeah.
Well, and I think as we continue to build on our narrative, continuously new resource material is being found, because a lot of information is hidden. A lot of information, we hear that the Danes digitized the records and then made this gift to the people of the Virgin Islands by creating this dedicated website. Well, they didn't translate anything, number one, so it's in Danish. The way they entered, it's called metadata, and I'm not that person, but how they categorize things makes no sense some of the time. They have accepted assistance from Virgin Islanders in helping to make some corrections. But it's interesting what hasn't been digitized. So we were looking for documentation on the children of enslaved women and their owners who were born free and were given property. And there's a book that everything was recorded in. So what was digitized was the cover of that book that shows that there's some termite damage. And then that book has now been removed from the regular archives that you can, go ask for something for and put into cold storage, which is what's happening with everything that's been digitized, right? you have access to the digitized item. You do not anymore have access to the original document. And is it a matter of convenience that that document wasn't digitized? That, you know, the names are unknown? You know, and then when we asked, when we had someone go and ask to see it before it went into cold storage, they wouldn't give it to her. And she was a scholar and a researcher and Danish, and, you know, that works. But then, you know, David Berg and Juliana Berry uncovered a phenomenal number of digitized images in New York City at the Schomburg, right? And through that research, they've now documented that there's more photographs in California that nobody has, that aren't digitized, that nobody has really seen. So we have the opportunity and the need, and we really need, as a community and as a people, to be demanding that resources are put towards that kind of research by Virgin Islanders for Virgin Islanders.
It really did hurt my heart most recently when I heard about the cutbacks at DPNR, because we know that they're in charge of our libraries and archives. And again, I'm going to state it is very important that we are wielding persons in anthropology and archaeology, persons in knowledge of library, because even though we think of tourism as one space, as entertaining tourism, I think cultural and identity tourism will also play a big role in the bolster of our economy. I think people, it's been studied, people don't want to come to spaces for sand, sun, and beach anymore. They want like complete experiences. But it's questionable, can we give them those experiences when we ourselves are still looking for our completeness and identity? So it's very important that we are acknowledging that, and that we are making students and making our current population aware of those little gaps, and using community to build identity and to build a true story. Oral history for a long time was not recognized by academia. Now there's oral history courses and certificates and degrees, because oral history is not just to Afro-Caribbean people. Oral histories are credited throughout the world, and they build and they make countries what they are. And so I'm grateful for persons who are holding spaces digitally to tell stories. There may be instances where oral history may have gaps in it, where we may not be saying like, I wouldn't say truth, but we filled in things because it made sense. But those are the things that we get to work through. So I'm grateful, but I would want to, I don't know if we should talk about the incidences of 1848 emancipation for the crowd. So if you would like to reiterate some of the things that you stated in the video.
Okay, so I thought it was all going to be on a video, right? So 1848 is presented as, in my growing up, was presented as a spontaneous uprising. And in having access to the research of numerous historians and people who have investigated, the rebellion of 1848 was planned for at least a month, but in all likelihood much longer. And there were a lot of things that precipitated the revolt. In addition to the horrible conditions and the way enslaved people were being treated, the British had emancipated their enslaved population. There was uprising in France, and what?
Springtime of Nations.
Yes, the Springtime of Nations. And in I'm going to get the year wrong. I want to say it was 47. The king of Denmark had issued an emancipation proclamation that emancipated, that from a certain date, the children of enslaved women were going to be born free, and it would take 14 years for all of the enslaved people to work, and then they'd be given their freedom. And that had become knowledge. So there are all of these things happening, and one would think, well, how does what's happening in France impact enslaved people in the Virgin Islands? Well, the French Caribbean was right down the road, and this was a place where there was lots of information coming in through the maritime trades. We know that we hear of John Gottlieb, known as Butto, and Martin King. We don't hear about Robert Moses he was a carriage driver from Butler Bay. And there's a list, and I'm just not going to come up with all of the names and be right, but I could cheat and get my phone. So there are about 5 or 6 men that we know of from Butler Bay, North Side, Mount Victory, and Spratt Hall, and so they're all in that northern, northwest corridor. Bagavallen is another one. So we know about them, and we know that they are dispatching messengers. There's a man who is dispatched who makes it to Negro Bay, and he is out there telling people, this is it, look for the signal. That's what he was dispatched to do. There's another writer who is dispatched and makes it all the way to Estate River. And everybody know where Estate River is, right? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, good. For those of you that don't, it's now been rebranded as Carambola, but it's Estate River. The person who makes it the furthest east, I believe, makes it to Kings Hill? Kings Hill, Lorraine, all the way to Lorraine. And they are advising everybody on the plantation about the action to be taken at midnight of July the 3rd. And they are out there under threat of death, that if they do not do what they've been told to do, they will be found and they will be killed. So that's a massive amount of organization. Martin King is the head of the militia, is a member of the militia, and he's in Grove Place on the day that emancipation kicks off. There's some documentation that suggests that that John Gottlieb, who we know as Butto, now a lot of people are saying he was a free man. He was born enslaved, and he was enslaved until emancipation in 1848. What he was a driver. That's what he was. And a driver was the enslaved person working with the overseer to manage the workers in the plantation. He also was in the sick house. And he does show up and is documented as being in place with the uprising on July the 3rd. And for a minute, we just have to imagine that by 6 o'clock in the morning around Fort Frederick, there are about 2,000 to 3,000 enslaved people that have gathered. By 10, 11 o'clock, it's about 6,000 people. And what's only mentioned as passing is the women who are assembled at the corner of what is now the park, who have bundles of material to set the place on fire, right? What we don't see a lot of is names of women until we get to the records of the court hearings. And some of those have been translated, not all of them. But that's where we see women as part of the organized movement. And then emancipation, you know, everybody has come into Frederiksted on that day. And as story goes, there were two dispatches to Van Schulten for him to come. One at about 6 o'clock in the morning where he didn't respond. And the other one was after noon where he was given a deadline. If you don't come, we're burning everything down. And then he shows up between 3 and 4 o'clock and declares all unfree in the Danish West Indies are now free. Then what happens? Up to that point in Frederiksted, there had been no death, no killings. But then there's revelry, and then people are spreading out and spreading the word on all of the plantations. And then there are some incidences of violence in the Frederiksted and greater Frederiksted area. The next day, Major Gillich conscripts Badeau and goes with other members of the militia. And by conscripting him, he's forcing him to go to all of the plantations to let people know what has transpired, because uprisings are now happening on the plantations. They are burning down plantation houses. There are uprisings beginning to happen. And we know he makes it as far as Grove Place, where they are there to quiet things down, where Martin King is leading the uprising. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the island, there are formerly enslaved people. This is the day after. This is July 4th, entering Christiansted from the western suburb and from the east side. But they are met by armed militia. And the armed militia fires on them, and 19 people are killed. I think it's 19 people are killed. And that disperses the group that was coming into Christiansted. So Christiansted, the people in Christiansted were activated. They did move, and they did pay a price by having been shot down. And our bloodless revolution got bloody. It got bloody. And it lasted for days. It lasted for days, and it required the importation of the military and police from St. Thomas, from the British Virgin Islands, and from the French Caribbean, and from Puerto Rico. So it became a multinational force that was brought into Frederiksted to quiet down the enslaved people, and into Christiansted. So it's important for us to note that there are lots of other people that were organizing where it's been documented. There are a lot of women that were involved, but we haven't done a lot of research on what their roles were. But for 6,000 people to be gathered surrounding the fort took a lot of planning. And for, the 1,000 or so that moved into Christiansted, that took planning. And when we ask why the difference in the numbers, right? Why the east side didn't mobilize? The large concentration of the plantations with large numbers of enslaved people were west of Kings Hill, right? Those were the larger plantations where you'd find 200, 300, 400 people on a plantation. Christiansted, they were enslaved people working in industry, working in the houses, and the farms east of Christiansted were cattle, sheep. There was some cotton, but not a lot. So they did not have the large number of enslaved Africans and people of African descent on those plantations. Lorraine did, Bagavallen did, what we now call Smithfield was one of the largest plantations. Wim and Knott Side had lots and lots of enslaved people because of the topography. Yeah. So
I kind of want to pose some questions to you. Okay, so one of my first questions is, there was research that came out, and we always sang our songs about, it was only Father Ryan, and so now you spoke about in the video the importance of churches, and that those churches were really built from the spirit of the enslaved. And so how is it important to also include our historical churches in the narrative of emancipation?
Oh, I think it's really important. So I learned from fairly recently. We look at St. Patrick's as this amazing church here in Frederiksted, and we look at the number of Black Catholics, right? So the story I had heard was it was built for the Irish, right? Overseers and who had been brought in. St. Patrick's, as we see it today, was built by and for free Black men and women. Their money, their labor, built the church that we see today. It was not built by the church. It was built by the free Black community in Frederiksted. And then post-emancipation became the largest Black church. It used to be that the Moravian church was called the Black church. Well, emancipation, everybody they went right to the Catholic church. The Lutheran church, although today has a large Black population, the Lutherans never recruited Black people. They did not encourage their enslaved people to be baptized. The space that was in the church was for those who were serving, right, in service to the people that were attending the church. Enslaved people were not members of the church. And when you go and you look at the old records, you'll see Moravian in terms of people being baptized. You'll see Catholic. You'll see some Episcopalian. Not a lot, but you'll see some. So I think in Frederiksted, St. Patrick stands as a beacon of the strength, the determination, and the wealth, or the combined community wealth of the free Black population. I'm getting a sign.
Okay, is it a wrap-up sign?
Yes,
or?
It's a wrap-up sign.
Oh my, I was going to talk about vernacular structures, but okay.
We can do that.
We have some, okay, so I want to get your take on the designation of our architecture being called Danish architecture. Do you think that we should recontextualize that term? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and how should we speak about our vernacular architecture that tells the story of this space?
Well, I always referred to it as Danish colonial architecture until Javier Larson corrected me. And the designs that we see, and when I went to Denmark for the one and only time, I'm like, okay, this doesn't look like anything that we have, right? There's no linkage. Most of the architects for those buildings that were designed by architects, those architects were British. Every building that we called Danish colonial was built by, engineered by, enslaved Africans. Every one. There was one enslaved African that the Moravians, Brother Cornelius, he laid the cornerstone for every Moravian church. St. John, St. Thomas, St. Croix, because he was the master mason, right? And he could supervise also, he was a master carpenter. So as we look at these buildings and we think of them, and some people say, oh, just tear them down, they all, the numbers that are in them for the posts and beams in the old wood buildings were carved in there by the hands of an African or African descended man. The stones, the coral was harvested by enslaved Africans off the shores of our island. They were cut by them, and the mortar was mixed by them, and you will see fingerprints that are theirs and of the children that were helping them put the small stones into the wall. So those are ours. The Danes provided the money, and they occupied them.
I think that's part of the story of cultural tourism, and I think that's a big part of our brand that we should incorporate, that these tongues are made by people of African descent. And so it is, in my opinion, we should say that these are African tongues.
They are. Thank you. All good? Thank you.
Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you, Ms. Gerard. Thank you, Ms. Brown, for what a wonderful presentation on the history of the Virgin Islands, post and pre-emancipation. At this time, again, the last discussion that we'll be having is Virgin Islands cuisine. Most Crucian cooking. I remember a conversation that I wasn't a part of, but I was present, and it was said that Crucian cooking is different than Virgin Islands cuisine, because the way how Crucian cook is definitely not Virgin Islands base, and you know, when you add in St. Thomas and St. John, it's totally different. We all know that. And on tonight's panel, I'm going to get the rest of the chairs. We have the Grand Master himself, Mr. Bradley Christian. We have Ms. Sandra Leon. We have Ms. Janesta Ritter. And we have Ms. Grace Carino. And we'd like to thank all of them. Come on up. I'll get more chairs. Come on up, and we'll have a healthy, well, you all, we'll have a healthy discussion led by Sandra about Virgin Islands cuisine and Crucian cooking.
Good evening. This is going to be a conversation about food and the cuisine of St. Croix. It's interesting that when you start to do research on food, cooks, and that kind, you don't get a lot of information. We do not write, we do not talk, we do not converse about foods. We do it amongst ourselves, but we don't do it for the general populace or for the world. And I hope that this evening is the beginning of the conversation where we're going to speak about the food and the cuisine of St. Croix Virgin Islands, which is very different from other places. We have many cooks, chefs, bakers, candy makers, condiment makers around. And when we ask them if they will come and speak about their trade, they shy away. So I want to thank those that are here on the stage with me this evening for being able to come forward and talk about the things that they do. We're going to talk about the traditional, and we're going to talk about how the traditional has moved forward, some because of people's religion, some because of people's diets, some because people just don't like certain things that are traditional. But we always have to remember what is traditional and where it came from. There are lots of cooks, and I'm going to give you a few names. Amy Mackay, Olivia Henry, Ingeborg Grigg, Lena Schultebrand, Arona Peterson, Olga Conrad, Virginia George, Mildred Andrews, the Peterson sisters, Adina Ken, Iona Pemberton, Eugenie Marco Christensen, Christophine Hansen, the Pemberton sisters, Janet Rouse, Bradley, and others. So that's just a taste of some of the people. And there are a lot more. But when you put Crucian cooks into the internet and into Google, a lot of names are not coming up. So we're going to have to start writing the narrative if we want other people to know what it is that we do and how proud we are of our food. So I'm going to ask each person on the panel to just give a little introduction as to what they do and what their take on the foods and the cuisine of St. Croix are. Starting with Janesta.
Okay, hi. I think I'm glad that you started off the conversation with acknowledging people who came before us, and I definitely recognize some of those names, and that's kind of where, especially when you mentioned the Pembertons, that's where I got an early start with being immersed by Crucian food. I guess I'll start by just sharing some of what I do with my relationship with food. Is I basically try to preserve and share what I know to be traditional desserts and traditional ways of preparing food, because even as a young person, I feel like a lot of people have forgotten what is Crucian food. And not just Virgin Islands, because we, on every island, even in our tiny little territory, we do things a little differently. So my focus has been for the last 10 years, mostly sweet treats and using our traditional way of blending spices to then cook some of our popular dishes. So I never claim to be the best cook, but for me, I take it very seriously because I feel like if we don't sort of acknowledge what's real and what's not ours, we lose our history, and then in 20, 30 years, people are going to forget what kalaloo is. Or they're going to say they never even heard of it. Just like maybe there's things that I haven't heard of or experienced or tasted because it was popular 100 years ago and not since the 80s when I was born. But yeah, that's kind of what I set out to do with my food business, is to take those traditional recipes. Some things you're going to have a spin on, which Amy could tell you all about spinning and twisting, I guess, you know, being from the younger generation. But that's pretty much me, my mission and what I set out to do, and how I've even raised my child who's from another generation. Like, you're gonna know what this feels like. I was just talking to somebody who's from here but who was raised in the States, and he was like, what's kalaloo? What exactly goes in kalaloo? So I was like, so you never pick kalaloo bush? And then I was like, so you never pick pigeon peas? They were like, no, it'll come in the freezer, right? So, and that's just our generation. So I can only imagine the 8-year-olds and the 9-year-olds who don't even know how to identify a pigeon peas tree. So that's pretty much me and my mission in a nutshell.
Thank you, Bradley.
Good evening. I'm going to just touch on some of our traditional dishes that we no longer have today. I don't know if anyone in the panelists know about kweng kweng. Kweng kweng is dry kalaloo. You put it in a brown bag and let it dry and shake up the leaves and you cook the kweng kweng. It does not taste like kalaloo. It has its own distinct taste. I have had kweng kweng as a child growing up. I didn't like it because, as I said, it's not kalaloo, but you had no choice. Whatever your parents gave you to eat, you eat it or you do without. Our Danish fish pudding, some people now are baking the fish pudding. I didn't know it like that. I know it to be done in a double boiler. You get maca bluefish, scrape it, you cut off the slice and scrape it with a spoon, season it up, and cook it in a double boiler. For people who didn't have the mold, you could use the old Miss Philbert butter can and put it in a pot of hot water. And that's how you did the Danish fish pudding. The water that springs from the fish pudding, you will drain that water off and make your sauce. When you know that you had a good fish pudding, it's when the fish pudding cool and you slice it and it stays together. Again, this is a tradition that we are losing because some people will make fish pudding and making it with any kind of fish. It's maca bluefish we know about. Sandra?
You want to talk about cakes?
Cake? Okay, we talk about, let's talk about cake. Let's talk about the Vienna cake. I think the Vienna cake have like 7 different layers. Some people are using jelly, some people are using jam. I know way back, it was preserved. And we show our own guava berry, we show our own pineapple, our own guava. We didn't use things out of the shop like jam. You know, we made our own preserve. And to make a Vienna cake, I just make it by baking the layer, let it sit for a day or two, slice the layer, build it with the different preserve, and I have changed that I've added carambola to my Vienna cake. I chew the carambola and put a layer that in as well. And for those of you who don't know, it tastes like Miami when it's chewed. Then we had to wet the Vienna cake with brandy or Cruzan. I use both. I mix brandy and Cruzan, and I wet the layers. Once I do that, I let the cake sit for a day or two so that the alcohol could evaporate out of the cake, but the cake still stay moist. And the third day is when you would icing the Vienna cake. The rum that you put in the brandy or the cruzan will make that Vienna cake last for at least a month without spoiling, without putting it in the refrigerator. We used to make, we make tarts today. I think sometime in July they have the tart war going on. One of the words that we don't hear anymore is Quelbet tart, and that is the fall-over tart. That word, Quelbet tart, has been last in the shuffle. Now everybody making the cupcake, tart, and plate, but we know the Quelbet tart, which was the fall-over. Again, we stew our own pineapple, guava berry, grate your own coconut and your own guava and stew it down. But now, people are using guava paste, people are using the pineapple out the jar. I don't. I would peel a pineapple, chop it up, and stew it for tart and cake.
Just for those who may not know what some of the flavors are, this is what was used. Guava berry, green gage, which is green lime, pineapple, guava, tamarind, gooseberry, red cherry, acerola cherry, yellow plum, and hog plum. You use the fruits that were in season. And now he's talking about carambola. So if fruit was in season, you use that. But again, you stewed all of them so they were fresh. All right, thank you, Ms. Grimes.
Good evening. Like Janesta said, I'm a fusionist, and I feel like I have a special relationship with food. I grew up in a family of cooks. My mom was born in St. Thomas, raised in Puerto Rico, and she has a Crucian father. So that in itself, in the way we eat and the things she made is different, and she cooks like a Crucian, even though she's not Crucian. And I come from an extended family of cooks on both sides of my family, and having traveled extensively across the world, I love food and have incorporated things that I've learned, techniques, into my traditional cooking. And also, I love cookbooks, and you mentioned Amy McKay's book. I think I had that book since I was like 6. I was the child with a cooking set. I always wanted an easy bake oven, never got it. My mom is like, you could cook in the oven, you could bake in the oven. And I always had cookbooks. So I've always had all those old-time cookbooks and have referenced them throughout the years. And a cookbook is just like oral history is a part of our history. So the way we cooked in the past was because of what we had in season and what we had available. So a lot of times you see things in recipes with evaporated milk. We use a lot of evaporated milk and canned goods because that's what we had. So now, in my cooking, a lot of times in places of something like evaporated milk, I would use coconut milk if it's, I'm trying to make a vegan dish, or heavy cream if I'm trying to just make a richer dish. So my relationship with food, I feel is special. It's part of my identity, and my inquisitiveness to fuse traditional with the new is what makes it so special.
One of the things I want all of you to talk about is the change. Red pea soup, pork, ham. Now you're not cooking it with pork and ham. You're having vegan red pea soup. You're having kalaloo. You got fish kalaloo, you got meat kalaloo, you got vegan kalaloo. Yes, we do change the way that we cook things because of how people eat. But then there are always the traditional meals that we have had. One of my pet peeves is when people say they're having a Crucian breakfast. Does anyone know what a Crucian breakfast is? Or what was served as a Crucian breakfast? Bradley?
Of course, saltfish. Sandra, someone asked me one time, what is the difference between pickup saltfish and salvage gondi? There's really no difference. The only difference with the gondi is when it's grind. But basically, it's the same ingredients that goes in both. Smoked herring, banana fritters, pumpkin fritters, beignet, little mini Johnny cake, oats,
Fried fish.
fried fish, dumb bread,
Ham.
boiled ham, that's correct, and caramel pop.
Exactly. And it was also whatever foods you had left over. So when you woke up Christmas morning, you might have had sweet bread or fruit cake and ham. So
Now they're having scrambled egg, boiled egg. That's something that is added. That was not originally part of the Crucian breakfast.
And in all of the... Okay, Janesta?
Okay, so I've seen this. I'm happy that you asked this question, but I've seen it like on Facebook, but posed a little differently. I know where you're coming from because you are sort of wanting to actually share what really is a Crucian breakfast. But when I've seen it on Facebook, it's more like, what around with them Crucian? What do it mean Crucian breakfast? Would I eat the same thing over here? And I'm like, isn't it just a matter of like, if I'm in Hawaii and they say it's a Hawaiian breakfast, or if I'm in Texas and they say this is a Texan breakfast, I always looked at it as just a matter of words. But I'm happy that you asked the question so that you could actually talk about what that traditional breakfast plate looks like. And I feel like it's always a matter of availability in every conversation. What if where you lived 100 years ago, had 10 mango tree? Your traditional dishes might have been very mango-y. And if I, for some reason lived in a coconut grove, maybe a lot of my dishes were very coconutty. And I think that I get really excited about that because we do evolve. The roads are different because we're driving cars now. I think the roads have actually regressed. And we have went backwards because when I look, I know this is off topic, but when I look at pictures of our historic towns, I'm like, wow, them roads look smooth. Well, there were no cars or big trucks to mash up the roads. But I have to say this, so Amy and I worked together in the past in public health spaces, and I'm like, I don't eat pork. So I'm probably on like the opposing end of the conversation, and we might, be enemies with this, right? But yes, a lot of things are veganified or, have seafood or even turkey neck alternatives because people have dietary restrictions, like you said. Their religious beliefs may impact the way that they eat and see our traditional foods. But working in a public health space, I do a lot of outreach, right? And I think it's like 16% of Virgin Islanders who are diabetic. So we have to acknowledge that in addition to our foods changing, chronic diseases and how that affects just the overall health and wellness of the Virgin Islands community, that have a lot to do with it too. So I'm the person that is gonna, make a vegan pea soup. Don't kill me. But there's somebody out there who doesn't eat pork, or somebody who might need a wheat dumpling instead of a white flour dumpling. But I do agree with you. Just don't, if something is a fusion like Amy said, because Amy will fuse anything. If you've ever seen her food posts, yeah, she will twist it up and it's still gonna be delicious. But yes, just don't call it original or traditional. I get it. And if you've had my vegan kanken vegan butter sauce, I probably get cussed for that. But then when people taste it, they'll be slugs in. And they ask for more. But again, it's to be more inclusive, to include people who may have an allergy to shellfish. Not even just thinking about chronic disease prevention, but just it could be a food allergy. So I just wanted to share that from a health perspective.
To add to that, when you have fusion or even substitution, you have to remember a lot of our family members and the Virgin Islands diaspora is beyond the territory. So, for instance, when I used to live in Italy, I can't find saltfish, right? Because that's just not something that's accessible or available there. So I, in turn, am now making saltfish with fresh cod because that's what's available for me there. And I know a lot of people who live in the States who are our family members, they can't find conch or they can't find pigtails. So they're like, well, they're going to use a ham hock or they're going to use smoked turkey neck or something like that to substitute. But it's still delicious, but you know, it's like you just have to, like our ancestors, do the best with what we have where we are.
And I don't think we have a problem with the changes that are made. It's just what you call tradition. And I think we want our children and our grandchildren to understand what was traditional. And it's historical. And it's history. And we want to pass it down. But things are going to change. You know, we talked about red grow. Go ahead, Bradley.
No, I just wanted to add that when we were talking about the Crucian breakfast, remember we had herring gondi. Herring gondi is different to stew smoked herring. We used to use pickle herring. And I remember a couple years ago, I had made herring gondi for Kenny Gitten's breakfast. And somebody came up and asked the question, oh, why is this so red? And Donna Christensen was there, and she told them, because Bradley made it the traditional way where you grind the beets in it. But people didn't realize that, you see? So, and I don't know if we could really find a pickle herring like we used to use long ago. I surely don't see it. I don't see it anymore, but that is what we used to make herring gondi with. And you boil, you grind it with the different pepper, sweet pepper, you know, thyme, chibble, and a kind of beets. It depends on how much you're making.
And a lot of people don't realize about the beets, so they don't understand. Yeah. The other thing is seasoning. And I have to talk about the Puerto Rican Hispanic influence on our foods also. You know, they have sofrito. But we have a dry seasoning, which is made. And people are making it, and some people are using dried herbs. I guess we want to, and some of us make it with fresh herbs. So then it is wet. So you have the wet and you have the dry. I know that you make it, so you want to talk about how you make yours?
Well, okay, so it's funny, right? I spent a few days, we talked about the food show that we went to in New York, and I had a mata and pestle on display, and I was having brief conversations with so many different people, like, okay, this isn't in a jar, but when you're mass producing things, which is something else we need to also acknowledge, when you talked about baking, when you're baking for your family, and when you're like a commercial baker, like a lot of people are now, shortcuts are taken. So I know I would very much prefer stew carambola, because now you had me wanting to show up to your house when you were describing the cake. But I think a lot of times people take shortcuts. So am I pounding? No.
No.
Am I pounding? No, because again, we evolve. So if you have a blender, like I think more people are blending ingredients to make sofrito than people are pounding sweet peppers and onions and garlics and ricao in a mata and pestle, and that, I think that's the reality.
Well, there's two things. There's pound seasoning and there's sofrito. Two different things.
I was in, which they're like the holy grail, very essential to me, to food. And you know, you mentioned sofrito. In other places, they what they call it, the Trinity. I think it's like onions, peppers, and celery. We're so similar but different in many ways, and we all know why. But yes, I know that they're different. But my point was that the way we do things, the techniques, sometimes the ingredients are there and they're the same, but the way you do it is different, because we have modern technology that just makes our lives easier. But I feel like the flavors should remain the same. I wanted to say something, right? Kendall asked me to come here, so I'm going to say it. We have more French fry spots on the island than actual Crucian restaurants. There's more places that you could go and get high cholesterol. I just found out I had high cholesterol. I was very offended. You know, I was like, what do you mean? They say, yeah, you gotta stop eating so much can lobster. I was like, I don't understand it. The water are right there. But no, I wanted to say that because if somebody were to visit St. Croix and ask me where they could go to get, like, our food, like, there's, for every 10 fried chicken and French fry and, you know, hamburger spots, it might have one place that they could actually get our food. That math actually might be really off. And when I travel to eat. Like, I would go somewhere just to try the food. And for every, you know, international destination that I've been to, or even states in the United States, they have a unique food scene. You could say, well, okay, yeah, this place, they were known for, like, haghead, this and that. Or this place had really good barbecue. Or, you know, like, Amy lived in Italy. When I went to one particular part in Italy, it was so much fresh seafood. They used a lot of figs. They used, you know, because that was what was growing around them. But when you come to St. Croix, where do you take people? And then I get really upset when people on Facebook, I pick my battles, but this is one that I will always choose. When somebody who's never been here asks the question, where can I get good local food? And then you tell them about the closest roti shop. And I'm like, no, they didn't say Trinidad, they said St. Croix. So, and no, I love a good curry, but that's how people become misinformed. Like Sandra said, we're not writing it down, which I think this is being televised live, so these conversations are important. Bradley, and your experience, definitely different from me and Amy. I don't feel like it should be watered down, and I feel like people should know who we are, and our food is a reflection of who we are. And it's never going to be a roti, and that's okay. And I know people get offended, but I say things like, if you're in Mexico and you ask, hey, take me to get local cuisine, they're not gonna take you to a burger joint, and they're not gonna take you to a pizza spot. And I feel like it shouldn't be any different when you come to St. Croix.
I heard Janiska mention about the blender. I know there are people in the audience sitting who know what I'm talking about. We didn't know nothing about a blender or food processor. We know about a chopping board with a hackler. You had the wrong chopping board out of wood, and the hackler, you chop your sweet pepper, parsley, celery in there, and that's what we used to do to make what they're referring to as sofrito. It was just, we the Christians just know it as cut up seasoning. And we didn't use sofrito like you go to the supermarket and buy the sofrito in a jar. That did not exist when I was growing up. So things change as we go along, you know. But a lot of the traditional stuff that we're accustomed to is no longer here, unfortunately.
Another thing that's hard to find is hot sauce. We have hot sauce. You have a hot sauce for fish, and you have a hot sauce for meat. You have a hot sauce that's made with vinegar and oil, and you have one that's made with mustard. You might have one that's made with something else. But hot sauce is supposed to have flavor, not just be hot. And again, limited persons are making hot sauce. You can buy all kinds of hot sauce, including some that have some names we can't call here tonight. And they're not flavorful, they're hot. We like hot sauce with our fish, but we want it to accent the food that we're eating. This evening is about us talking about traditions and changes, the new and the old, so that you truly understand that we have a little bit of it. If you come to my house, you're going to have some old food. made the old way. You know, you're gonna have macaroni and cheese. You're gonna grate it. You know, we'll see about that. I also make jams and jellies, and they all have to be refrigerated because there's nothing but the fruit and the sugar and the lime. So they have to be refrigerated. And I'm not going to change the way I make it just so that it can last for 5 years. I'll make small batches so that those persons who purchase from me or those persons that I give it to will have it. I make green gage. And green gage is a delicacy, especially for a Vienna cake. But I have a friend who every time he comes to St. Croix, he wants a gallon bottle of green gage. And he uses it with bagels and cream cheese. He says that's his favorite. It's a fusion, yes. But I also make it 2 ways. I make it smooth and I make it chunky. And it's not super sweet. Some people make it super sweet. But again, if you want to try those things, you know, like when Stanley, we had the function in March at Whim, I brought all kinds of jellies. I bought guava, mango, green gage, sorrel, a mango fusion. So it's being done, and we just need to share it so that people know. There are also condiments to foods that we eat. You know, Shalita asked me, oh, can you stew sorrel? Because there's a picture on Facebook of a sorrel tart. You
right.
can.
That's right.
And I make sorrel jam. I didn't want to throw away the leaves after I made the concentrate for juice. So I added the sugar and I made a jam. And I ground it up. And it's delicious. But again, in the olden days, that's why they had a group of women sitting down when they were making things, because it's time consuming. And it's a lot of work. But they enjoyed talking and they enjoyed doing it. And some of us do enjoy doing it, and others, we have some shortcuts. And there are shortcuts that we take. But we just want to talk about traditions. The last thing we're going to talk about is candies and sweets. So there are very few people who make a traditional tart with a flaky crust. And if you're like me, I like coconut. So I am a coconut girl. Coconut. Yay!
Guava berry.
And one of the, I want a tart with a good crust. I don't want a heavy crust. I don't want a thick crust. I don't want a crust that crumbles when I take the first bite. I want to be able to take the first bite and continue eating it, and it's whole. But again, tarts are made by different people and in different ways. There's also a difference of us baking with butter and margarine. And I immediately can tell when margarine has been used and not butter. So I'm going to turn it over to Bradley, who bakes. And he can tell you a little bit about the sweets that he does. And then the other two can fill in.
Sure, as you were saying, of course the butter is better than the margarine. And if it's a good baker, you could really tell whether it's butter or margarine. You mentioned about red grout.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you out there know sago, but we didn't make red grout with tapioca years ago. It was sago. And the sago was a bigger pearl than the tapioca. When the sago went out, then the tapioca came in. You had the guava. You peel the guava skin and you boil that skin to make the red grout. Then you scoop out the seed, stew it, and throw milk over it, and the kids loved it. And then the shell, you will, after you clean it out, you will stew the shell for tart or chop it up fine for a Vienna cake. Nowadays, people are telling me that, oh, I am asking myself with looking for a guava. I buy guava juice. I've never heard of such a thing till lately. Whenever guava come in existence, I freeze it so that I could always have guava to make guava goat. Now there's also carambola grout. You know, people are making that. I know I have made it with guava berry. And a lot of people that taste it from me said that it's a real hit, you know. But remember, we didn't always have tapioca. It's something called sago, and it's no longer in existence. So we substitute the tapioca. The sago had a bigger pearl than the tapioca. And of course, you made a nice custard cream that go over your grout. Okay? Before I turn it over to Janessa and the others, we have strayed away from our traditional way of cooking. Now, people use gravy master, gravy broiling. We didn't use that. We browned white flour. And there was an art in browning the white flour, because if the white flour burn, your gravy burn and bitter. And if you is a real long-term Crucian, you could taste the difference with kitchen bouquet or gravy master gravy, and there's a big difference with the brown flour gravy. Much better.
It's his face when he said it with so much passion. But I'm happy that you mentioned how things like our foods and what they look like, how they're impacted by the availability of ingredients that were common and easy to find. I mean, if you think about it, in maybe like 2 generations ago for me, it was an ice box, not a fridge. So, no, I mean, you're laughing, but really things that you had to hurry up use because it would spoil. We have it in cans now and things like that. But we talked about tart briefly, and you know, this whole tart, you know, is dividing the nation. And on this stage is 75% coconut, and the only reason we're not getting on you about guava berry is because it's guava berry and it's in a league of its own, and it's not really mentioned when people, like I like carambola tart, I've had gooseberry tart, so I would say that guava berry is kind of like up there and it's not mentioned and when you're comparing. But for people who don't like coconut tart, it's because they haven't had a good one. And I want to go on the record and say that. So if you don't like coconut tart because it's dry, it'll choke you. I can't even hear nobody else right now. It's because you haven't had a good one. So my paternal grandmother baked. So when you said cuelba, I'm only 38, but I know what it is because she always had my mother cuelba waiting for her when she come pick us up. So I don't see it. I've seen it in a bakery before, but I feel like finding a good tart is so hard these days. A lot of the bakers that I grew up like loving to eat from, like Cheryl Muckle, for example, was one of the best tart makers that I know. She's passed on. And I wanted to mention just, you know, people passing on because we all have to go. And oftentimes our recipes, our traditions, our ways of doing things go with us. They're not recorded. I listened to Frandel and she's rattling off all these things and I tried to mentally take note as quickly as she was speaking, but we have to write things down. I know Shalana would appreciate me saying that because she's a big history buff, but if you never share it with anyone, or at least with your family, then it disappears. In one generation, one unfortunate event and you're gone, and so is your famous tart, or so is your unique family recipe. So I just wanted to share that as well. And as our population changes, so does our food scene. So does what food here on St. Croix looks like. I feel like it's probably easier, like I said, to find fried food or Alfredo. You could probably find 10 places with an Alfredo entree. Or many. Like I see somebody talking about conch Alfredo. I was like, okay. I would try it, but that's not our thing. And I feel like more younger people need to join this space and need to be under your wings, because I was under Auntie Lenore wings. So like I feel like I picked up a lot, and not just her. I think I've just been lucky to have grandmothers and adopted grandmothers who can cook really well. But for those who are not so fortunate, it's TV dinners and burgers. And McDonald's was a treat, but Amy said McDonald's, you know? So I think, like I said, the oral history is important, but writing things down and those recipes is equally important if you want to preserve our culture through food.
I thank you for that.
I was going to say, like Janessa mentioned, oral history is important, and the reason why a lot of our food ways and recipes are not passed down is because we, as a people, hold a lot of stuff to our chest. So, you know, me asking my great aunt, like, well, how you don't make these butter cookies? And it's like, I can't tell you, but let me show you. You know, that type of way. So it's like they throw this and they throw that, and they don't know either, because their grandmother just showed them the same way. And like Janessa, I was fortunate to be in the kitchen when I used to be under, you know, a lot of people in the kitchen. I was before I could reach the counter, I used to stand on a cracker pan, a Keebler cracker pan, to help my mother make cookies and to make cake and stuff like that. So every family member's house I went to, I was in their kitchen with whoever was cooking or baking. And that's how I learned to cook, because nobody ever like told me how to make rice, or I was just like, they're like, oh, come wash the rice, do this, do that. So we do need to record our recipes, and we do need to be a little bit more giving of those, because they're like secrets, because when you're the best Vienna cake maker, you're not trying to let go of that title, right? So you may give me a recipe for Vienna cake, but it's not going to taste like yours, right? Because I might take shortcuts or I might make substitutions. But I think that it's very important to, you know, just be allow a little bit more grace and leniency with the recipes. I look at you because you know why.
She was one of them that checked out the red grout at the function in March, and it was made with fresh guava. And I'm going to say that 99% of the people who were there had not tried it with real guava. And they could not believe the difference in the taste and the consistency of it.
I was going to say, too, the guava was good, and I had never had green gage. And a lot of traditional cooking, even today, I had some sorrel from someone. And, you know, some people, it's just sorrel, they boil sorrel and it's sugar. There's no essence, there's no spice, there's no anything. And I always feel like specifically with Crucian cooking, like when you get that plate, or you're in the proximity of that food or that drink, it hits your nose, before it hits your palate. And I remember when I had the green gage, like as I put the spoon to my mouth, I could smell the lime. And I was like, oh, I knew it was going to be good. As soon as I was like, oh, it's going to be good. And that's what's missing a lot of times with the tradition. Like, we have to take shortcuts sometimes, but sometimes we just completely omitting things. It's just like, you know, guava jelly or like guava juice and sugar, and we calling it jam. And we have to, you know, stop that.
I want to thank everyone here this evening, both the people who have come to listen to us and those of us on the stage. And I vow to make sure that I'm going to keep all of these people in my back pocket, and we're going to start writing, and we're going to start putting information on the web, because I was very upset when I couldn't find names and recipes and traditions. I did find some stuff from the Danish archives. And again, it was interesting to look at what they thought about the foods and what came. So this is a conversation that we're going to continue. We're going to talk about other things. We're also going to try and see if we do something where we have tastings so people can taste what traditional tastes like. And we accept the fact that there's going to be changes made. But don't call Kalalu with talkie bone traditional. And fish in butter sauce with margarine. And your onions are supposed to be cooked. You know, the onions just get translucent when you cook them. So just don't cut up some raw onion, try it in there, and then get a bottle of lime juice that's concentrate, that's 100 years old, and try it in there and say, oh, we have a butter sauce with lime. It doesn't work. Dr. Peterson, you wanted to say something? You what?
I agree with you.
Oh, you agreeing with me. Thank you. All right. But I just want to say this has been a part of my love for being a Crucian. We haven't talked about the Puerto Rican side of it, and that's another conversation with other people. But we will continue this conversation. And you're going to start looking out, and we're going to show stuff because we want to see the changes that have been made. Bradley?
Yes, I just want to say something before closing. I know people make fried fish and they make fried fish sauce. But what people don't realize is that you have to let that acid cook out of the sauce, cook out of the gravy, because you're going to get sour stomach. I saw somebody post on Facebook, conch, and the conch was oily. And you know why? They let the butter boil and it turn to oil. I saw somebody post beignet. When they break the beignet, it was all white. I saw no spices in it. Supposed to cut all kind of spice, nutmeg, a little mace, cardamom, cinnamon, you know, but it's not supposed to be white. I mean, this was a very good session that we had here tonight. The young people, I'm glad to be a part of it with you all. And I am not the best, but whatever I know, I don't have a problem sharing with anyone who called and asked me about doing something. We have bread pudding, and maybe there's people out there who know we used to have a bread and butter pudding, where you use the sliced bread but cut up all the edge and butter the bread and do the custard sauce, sprinkle the raisin. That's a bread and butter pudding. Mix egg and milk.
It's delicious.
So thank you so much.
So thank you to everyone who's here this evening and to the panelists, and have a great evening. Casey?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, let's give all of them a big round of applause. I think it was very informational, very educational, and they really touched on a lot of great points that needed to be touched on, especially one of my pet peeve, Crucian breakfast with the stupidness. So again, thank you guys for coming out tonight. Don't forget, July 2nd and July 3rd is coming up. July 2nd, we tramping 6:30 from the Frederiksted Post Office down to Vaughan Richards Park, and then we dancing quadrille under the stars. July 3rd, we have the Folklife Music Festival. We have Razor Blades coming from Tatola, the Lashing Dogs coming from Tatola, Stanley and the 10 Sleepless Nights, the Renaissance Band. So we're having a Kwelbe Fungi Festival in Vaughan Richards Park starting at 6 p.m. and that's on July 3rd. So again, thank you guys for coming out. Thank everyone who took part in all of the 10 Sleepless Nights Folklife Festival events, and have a good night. Thank you.